Hey everybody, welcome back to the Fish Tank. I'm Fish, and it's time. That's right, Minion Masters Meta. Now, last month was our very first Minion Masters Meta video, and I asked you guys to let me know what you thought of it, and you delivered. We had some good views on it and a lot of comments, so it seems like something you guys liked, so I'm back, and we've got some more. So we're going to do a similar thing, but this time we've got last month's meta stats to look at, and see how they've changed, perhaps. Now, remember, we still don't have access to all of the useful data behind the scenes, but we do have access to the leaderboards. So what we're going to do is take a snapshot of the leaderboard, extract the data from that, and see what we can see going on generally, how things have changed, and what we can maybe reflect on. Now, before we go any further, I just want to say a very big thank you to my good friend Zeus, who helped me put together a program that automatically extracts the decks out of the screenshots of the leaderboard, which made my life a lot easier. Zeus, thank you very much. Okay, so without any further ado, let's have a look at the stuffs. So it's going to be a lot of graphs and stuff. You know, if you watched the last one, you know what you're in for. Okay, so this is going to be version 1.47. So what I've done this time, slightly different to last time, is that we're only a couple of weeks into the season. So hopefully you will have an opportunity to reflect on the information in this video, and maybe if you want to follow the meta, you can do so. If you want to play against the meta, you've got that information as well. The previous one we did was right at the end of the season, which wasn't ideal. So we've learned our lesson, and we've improved that. Okay, so the third thing we're going to look at is our master popularity, which is the most and the least played master. So we're going to start off looking at 1v1s. So on the left, we got our graph for the previous version, and on the right, the current version. Now, I know that the labels are tiny, but hopefully we can just go with the colors, and if you want to squint, then you can do so. But the big takeaway here is APEP, who was everywhere. Over half the leaderboard in the 1v1 ladder last season was APEP, but as you can see this season, we look at the blue, APEP is only a quarter of it. So APEP's still really over-represented. Now remember, the change balance-wise between these two patches was APEP got a small slap on the wrist with his auto attack. So that obviously made APEP weaker, but also potentially encouraged people to try something else. So one thing to note is, at the exact moment that I happened to take this snapshot of the leaderboard, all of the masters were on there, all 13 of them, which was pretty cool. So, as we can see with the blue, a lot of people have moved away from APEP, but what are they playing now? Well, Rekt and Morelia, very similar to what they were before. They were the second and third place masters. We see some more Valorian in there, and basically all of the other masters have had a bit of an uptick with their play rate, especially Volko, if we look at the stats there. Milloween, people were calling her dead, still 6% of the top 50 1v1 decks, Milloween. And if we just have a look at the average mana cost, hasn't really changed. One of the questions that new players always have is, what sort of mana cost or curve should I have? Well, the average mana cost, as you can see here in solos, is 3.5. So that's to give you an idea of the sort of cheap decks. Even with the changes to the bridges, cheap decks are still king. Right, let's have a look at master popularity, but this time in 2v2R, which stands for random. So again, we're going to have our previous graph on the left, 1.46, and our new graph on the right, 1.47, which is this season. And again, with the blue, we can see that there's been a big reduction in APEP. 38% of APEP decks in the last time we did this, and only 16% this time. So what are people playing instead? Well, you can see the yellow is increased a lot, and that's Morelia. So Morelia getting a lot more play in 2v2 randoms. What else can we see here? More players playing Stormbringer. Volko getting some more players as well. And remember, in the last change, Volko's perk 1 and perk 2 were switched round, so his Rage is activated earlier, but the Burn the Bridges is activated later. So similar to what we saw in 1v1, less people playing APEP and splitting that amongst some of the other masters. And again, if we look at the average mana cost, it went down a little bit. Still, 3.7 was 3.9, so again, we're talking about average mana cost of leaderboard decks between 3.5 and 4 mana. And then finally, let's have a look at our master popularity for 2v2p premates. Again, previously, APEP was 28%. This time, slightly different to what we've seen before, APEP increased, so more play rate with regards to APEP in 2v2 premates. But what else do we see? Again, an uptick in Morelia, the yellow. More people playing Morelia. And generally, if more people are playing Morelia, that means more people are playing Accursed decks. There's a very high correlation between those playing Morelia and those playing Accursed decks. There is a little bit of synergy between them. And when we get a little bit further in and we have a look at the cards and stuff that are very being played a lot this season, then we'll see if we see Accursed. But I've definitely seen Accursed a lot this season, more so than any season, and specifically I saw it a lot on the solo leaderboard, which is something we haven't seen before. Right, so anything else that we can take away from this? Less people playing Stormbringer, but it seems like some people went from APEP to Morelia, and that was about it. And again, if we look at the average mana cost, we've got 3.6 up to 3.8. So again, a small change, but you know, if your deck's between 3.5 and 4 mana average, then you're doing okay. Right, next up we have a look at the rarity compositions. So that's we're looking at the decks, and we're looking at the green, which is common, the blue, which is rare, the pinky purple, which is supreme, and the yellow, which is legendary. And then we can bring up last month's as well. And as you can see here, it's not much has changed, and as we can see, just like before, pretty much all decks have mostly common cards. Well, not mostly common cards, but almost half, almost 50% common cards, and then they make them up with some rare, supremes, and legendary. But this is just a reminder to new players, common cards don't mean they're bad cards, they just mean they're simple cards. You know, as the rarity goes up, kind of the more complexity of the card becomes apparent. But it's always, I think, important to see here that common cards are strong. And this is something that we discussed a lot before. This is very different to a lot of the other games, how they do it. Rarity is not directly linked to strength. Okay. So this is going to be a new little statistical thing for this month that we didn't have last month, where we're going to look at the composition of the factions. Which are the most played factions in the different game mode. This was just a little bit of extra that I thought I could dig out of the data, and again, we'll have a look at it. I know the labels are tiny, but I've tried to color things to make them kind of fairly obvious. So we've got the dark green, which is Accursed, Empyrean, which is yellow, kind of yellowy orangey, Scrat, which is red, Voidborn dark red, Outlander blue, Zenshi green, the bright green, Crystal Elf the pink, Stoutheart the light blue, and Slither the bright yellow. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. So if we have a look at 1v1s, so we see that the most played factions are Voidborn, Scrat, and Empyrean. Just remember the different factions have varying levels of synergy. So you have things like the Accursed and Accursed Ascension, where you kind of want to play almost an entire Accursed decks. Similar to Empyrean, where you need at least 7 Empyrean cards to trigger their Empyrean army. Whereas there's other factions that have kind of similar sort of bonuses, like the Scrat Swarm, things like that, but you can achieve them with far less cards. So you can have a way more diverse deck when it comes to the faction. Okay, so we don't see too much Accursed in solo. I would say we've seen more this season than ever, to be fair. But then if we look in the 2v2 randoms and in pre-made, we see a lot more Accursed. And over a quarter of the decks, a quarter of the cards were Accursed in 2v2 randoms. And as mentioned, that's a case that if you're going to go for Accursed, you're going to go really in for Accursed. So 2v2 randoms, Accursed, Empyrean, and Scrat were the top 3. And in 2v2 pre-mades, Voidborn, Scrat, and Accursed. So there's sort of 3 or 4 factions there: the Voidborn, the Scrat, the Accursed. and the Empyrean that really seem to be represented strongly in all of the different modes. Next up, we'll have a quick look at the wildcard usage. So remember, no wildcards in solos. And similar to what we saw in the first video, where overwhelmingly most of the decks are not using wildcards. I love to see this. Hate wildcards. Love to see people not using them. And we can see that in 2v2 randoms and 2v2 pre-mades, there's some with one wildcard and there's some with two wildcards. And just out of interest, in randoms, the top 3 wildcarded cards were the Walking Blind Date, the Undying Skeleton, and the Unholy Ground. And pre-mades were Bridge Buddies, Scotty the Sensitive Savage, and the Scrat Launcher. Now, next up, we're going to look at the most played cards. So this is going to be slightly different to how we did it before. I had the top cards overall last time, but what we're going to do is we're going to look at the top cards without spells. So previously we had top cards with everything, and then we looked at spells as well, and there were kind of spells in both of them, which wasn't particularly useful. So this time, top cards, which is going to be minions, puffs, buildings, just anything that's not spells. So we do have the previous data to draw it on here. So we're trying to fit a lot of information into sort of one little infographic here. So you'll notice that the different cards have a different border, and that border tells us a few things. So if it's got a white border, that means it's a new addition to our top, what this is, top 9. If it's a black border, I don't know if there's any black ones on this one, but that means it's something that's already in there and hasn't changed its spot. If it's a green, it means it was in there previously, but it's now higher up. And red means it was also in there previously, but it was lower down. So if we look at the 1v1 leaderboard, we see a lot of white borders there. That means there's a lot of cards that are there that weren't there last month. So the Assassin was the top played card. Then we had the Blood Imps and the Heal Puff. You tend to find those two together. And it's really interesting, especially for new players, because a lot of the new players will read the Blood Imp card and just think, that sounds awful. Why would I ever want to use that? But as you can see here, this is a very, very well played card at the top level. So this just goes to show that just because you don't necessarily understand a card and it might seem bad, that doesn't mean that that's the end of it. As we know, Blood Imps is a card you need to play carefully. Anything with Blood Pact, you need to play carefully. You need to try not to get them punished. But remember, these are cards that effectively allow you to trade mana for health. So Blood Imps, you get 5 of them. Combined, very, very strong DPS. There's only 1 mana cost. They can take both bridges. But of course they do have Blood Pact, which costs you your Master's health. And then we see a lot of cheap cards here. So we've got the Rocket Scrat, we've got the Crossbow Dudes, Elite Swarmer, Stint, Tantrum Throwers, and Jolo. So we can see we were expecting when the bridges were changed, the rules were changed, that we were going to see a lot more heavier decks. That really isn't the case, and we see a lot more just cheap cards, cheap cycle decks, even though that some of the Masters have changed from timer, so a 2-timer from cycle. So interestingly, the Cage Prowler, which was everywhere last season, we haven't seen that so much this season. Remember, that did get a balance change, so it takes longer to spawn, if you like, and will require less damage to stop it from spawning. And also we don't see the Cleaver. It seems that people are playing the Assassin instead of the Cleaver. Similar kind of card where you have this big damage in one instant, and of course the Assassin gets the stealth bonus. Now 2v2 randoms. See, again, we've got some cards in there that are improving on where they were before. So we got the Elite Swarmer, Curse Bearer, always going to be strong in 2v2s where there's loads of things for it to curse. The Grenadier, the Stint dropping down a little bit. The Walking Blind Date still very, very well represented. Even though it did get a nerf in the last patch, it gives you between a 3 and a 4 mana card instead of always a 4 mana card. And that just goes to show that a lot of the value from the Walking Blind Date was its bridge grabbing mechanic, not necessarily what you're getting out of it. That was just kind of a bonus. And then again, we see some new cards entering in here. We got the Crossbow Dudes, the Lost Legionnaires, the Undying Skeleton, sorry, and the Warrior. I I think the Lost Legionnaires are in there for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I think we've seen more Empyrean decks this season, but also they're just a good split, tanky split for cheap. Undying Skeleton, that's just from a lot of Accursed decks. Probably wouldn't play that too much out of an Accursed deck. And the Warrior, just a good tanky little guy. Now, the cards that we kind of haven't seen that have dropped out of the randoms top are the Defenso Chopper and the Rocket Scrat. Just not quite seeing so many of those. And then again, if we look at the 2v2 pre-mades, we've got the Elite Swarmer and the Stint still right up there as the top played cards. We've got the Swarmers being even more played than before, the Cursebearer, Defenso, and Rocket Scrat. This is interesting because we're talking about these cards dropping out of the randoms top, but then they're also entering into the top of the pre-mades. Walking Blind 8 there again, but played a little bit less, probably because of the nerf a little bit. And again, the Grenadier and the Jolo. So one thing to think about, especially with cheap cards like the Grenadier, is it's really good AoE, and that's great in duos when there's just lots of things, especially if there's lots of skeletons, and there always is. You know, there's always a lot of Accursed. So those are the top cards. So this should be interesting for existing players to see what's going on out there, but also interesting for new players, because new players always feel like if they've got some shards, it feels like they're burning a hole in their pocket. They want to craft something. What shall I craft? Well, crafting any of these on here, you're not really going to go wrong. You can see these are strong cards. Some of them are fairly niche cards. Others are cards that you can play in anything, but of course, anything from this is going to be a good addition to your card collection. Okay, so that's the top non-spell cards. Next, we're going to look at the top spell cards. So again, we're going to look at 1v1, 2v2 randoms and pre-mades. Right, so okay, so we see the Chain Lightning for 1v1. That's got a black border. That means it's still where it was from last time. So the Chain Lightning and the Beam of Doom still very, very strong there. But interestingly here, even in 1v1, we see Accursed spells. Now, Accursed generally hasn't been strong in solos. It's always been a 2v2 strat, because it's kind of weak early on, and in 2v2s your teammate can help you out. But here we can see in 1v1 we're seeing some Accursed spells in there, and Unholy Ground is really everywhere at the moment. Since they changed it so that it immobilizes everything, it is very, very strong in almost any deck, and just bonkers strong in an Accursed deck. So it'd be interesting to see. I know we've got a PTR this weekend. I'm expecting to see some nerfs going on with regards to that, but we'll see where we land with that. Okay, Impetus Blast Shining, very, very fun card in solos or any mode, of course. Very high skill card, always good to see that out there. Werewolves coming back a little bit. Werewolves I still feel are a little bit overtuned. They are very, very strong for what you get. Very tanky, good DPS. The way that they apply their DPS is pretty quick, so they can deal with hordes pretty well. So a lot of werewolves out there. And if we look at the 2v2 randoms, before we go to the randoms, let me just remind you, one of the things that we don't see in the 1v1 that we did last season are the future cards. Remember, both future cards, future past and future present, did get a mana nerf, and that kind of dropped them out of contention for a lot of people, and definitely here the stats that we were recorded show that. Those are not amongst the top cards, top spells for solos or any modes. So that's change might have been a change too much. Some of it could get reverted, who knows. Right, 2v2 randoms, as we can see, a huge amount of Accursed spells. Corpse Explosion is the newest on there, but the other ones were already on there previously. Unholy Ground as the top spell, again, Chain Lightning being very, very powerful, even though it has been receiving some small nerfs recently. And then Avalanche, of course, was something that we saw a lot of last season. This season it's dropped out of the randoms top spells. And if we just go on to the 2v2 pre-mades, again we see quite a lot of the accursed cards in there. Not quite as much as in the randoms, which is somewhat interesting, but still unholy ground. It's in all of the top spell, top 9s. Just goes to show just quite how strong that is. And again, we see Beam of Doom in all of them. We see Chain Lightning in all of them. And Howling Moon. Howling Moon has seen its placing solos as well. One thing to note, I think the meta has changed quite a lot this season in solos. Even just sort of day to day, we've seen some Korgoth metas where he's been kind of everywhere in the Voidborn decks, and then people sort of respond to that with playing things like Howling Moon to try to deal with this big guy. And then you get this kind of the chicken and the egg situation with those two decks going head to head. And then, as mentioned before, we've had Accursed as well. Seeing that a lot on the solo leaderboard, as well as both of the other leaderboards. Okay, so there we see the spells. Again, if you're new and you're thinking about, oh, what spell should I run? This will give you a good idea. Remember, some of these are quite specific to decks, so a lot of the Accursed spells will be played together in Accursed decks, whereas there's things like the Beam of Doom and the Chain Lightning that you can throw in any deck and you'll get your value out of them. Right. Now, legendaries. Again, this is a question that a lot of new players will ask. What legendary shall I craft? Well, if we see what's strong at the moment, that'll give you a good idea. So, again, the 3 leaderboards. So if we look at the solo leaderboard to start with, we see Jolo and Jinglong right there at the top. And not really surprised too much about that. Jolo, of course, did get nerfed a little bit recently. I tend to play Armored Scrats instead of him. They seem just better overall, but a lot of people still playing him. Jinglong is a strong card, the little blue dragon there, but of course he is quite a skill-based card as well, doing his juggle with your spells. So not necessarily the best card for beginner. We see Ardera wasn't in the top 9 last month, but she is now, and I think that's really just part and parcel of the fact we've had a lot of increased Empyrean decks on the leaderboard. Howling Moon still in there. Shield Captain Avaya. Shield Captain Avaya is really, really strong. She kind of comes and goes from the meta, but she's never weak. I guess it just depends what people feel like playing. And again, there we see the Corpse Explosion, which we spoke about, how the Accursed is getting into solos, even though we're not specifically used to seeing that. And we see quite a strong Slither presence here. We've got the Musketeer, Herald Moon, and the Snake Druid. So those are the sort of cards that, again, you see in a lot of decks combined together. Some of the cards that were in the 1v1 top 9 last time and aren't, things like Scotty and Azog. Not necessarily sure why, but these things just happen from time to time. Okay, and again, we look at the randoms, top legendaries, Howling Moon, up there again, Zips, Zapinator. Zips Zapinator there in 3rd place is a card that we see a lot of people complain about. It is a strong card, but of course it does have its weaknesses, but it is one of those cards like Rendrath, where it's the worse your opponent is, the stronger the card is. If you keep playing into things like Rendrath or Zip Zapinator, you're going to get punished. If you try to deal with it appropriately, if you think about allowing it to come to you, swarming it, things like that, then it's not quite so valuable. But I think Zip Zapinator is... The reason you see that played a lot, and not things like Rendrath, is first it's a lot cheaper, but also even if you deal with it properly, it can be a hassle. It puts so much pressure on a lane that it really prevents you a lot of times from playing into it. And because it's so slow, both its movement and the way it attacks and takes 8 minutes to reload, it can really loiter around on a bridge. And of course XP is so important, bridge control is so important in this new meta for Minion Masters. We see also on the random leaderboard here quite a lot of Outlander tech. So we got Ruby there, we got Razor Squadron and Tass, and always interesting to see Xiao Long. Xiao Long surprising to see him there, but he's obviously doing pretty well. And Jin Long in there as well, and Lady in Frey. What have we dropped out? Well, one thing we've definitely noticed this season that we had a lot of, last season, were Doom Cleaver decks. Doom Cleavers did receive a copy reduction, only 2 instead of 3 in the last patch, and that really changed quite how much people were playing them. We don't see Doom Cleavers anywhere near so much anymore. Right, and if we look at the pre-mades, again we see Howling Moon in there. That Howling Moon, if you see a card that's in all 3 modes in the top 9 here, you know that it's a strong card, and you know it's versatile, and it's if you're looking to add to your collection, it's definitely a good choice. Zip Zapinator up there again. Mardred making his way, I think. Yeah, he's the Prince of Nightmares. Mardred making his way in there, and some cards that have dropped out, as mentioned, the Doom Cleaver, that dropped out of both randoms and pre-mades. Right, so that is our meta analysis for version 1.47. So, as I mentioned, thanks so much for checking out the first edition of our it was very well received, which I was really pleased about, because it did require a lot of work really to put it all together, and appreciate everyone checking it out and doing the comments. We are crushing the subscriber count. We are so close to 2,000. As I'm recording this, we're at 1,999, legitimately. So I'm super stoked to get to that 2,000. If you're enjoying the content here in the fish tank, if you want to join along with us, if you want to make sure you don't miss out on any of the updates, any cool new stuff that we put out, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And let me know in the description, in the comments, let me know what you think again about this video. Are you still enjoying this? Is there anything I can change, do better? Let me know what your ideas are going forward. Anyway, that's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about today, and I look forward to seeing you again here in the fish tank in our next video, where I will also be finishing with an awkward wave.